Good evening and welcome to another edition of A Conversation with John Conenna. Tonight is a special night. We are going to talk about a great day in Chicago that basically is somewhat forgotten, but it's going to come through the eyes of two gentlemen that have been on our show before, and of course have the great book out, The Twins, A Journey of a Lifetime. The book published by with Tony and Carl Ruzicka, the authors, and those are our guests again tonight. Tony and Carl are becoming mainstays on my show, but they're great mainstays. But I have to tell you, tonight, in this book, we talk about December 29th, 1963, a special day, because for a while when I was a youngster growing up, it was one of the last championships, before this long drought in the city of Chicago. It was almost, I think sometimes the term of the late 60s comes from that game. We'll get them next year if it was the Cubs, the Blackhawks, the White Sox, or the Chicago Bulls. But we had to cling to that 63 thing for a while as our last championship if we go back and look at things. But gentlemen, Tony Ruzicka, Carl Ruzicka, good evening and welcome to another edition of this. I'd like to start by saying, when did you guys, before we get to the actual December 29th, 1963, when did you guys start to do work for the Chicago Bears? And I'll start with Tony.
Well, we were freshmen in high school. So all 4 high school years, we worked for the Bears clubhouse assistants. So it started out, if you don't mind, there was a picture of Bill Bishop, who was a Bears tackle, in the Cicero Berwyn Life newspaper. We grew up in Cicero, and it had on there Bill Bishop, Cicero resident. So I think we were in the 6th grade. Cicero, I wonder where he lives. Looked up his number in the phone book. Rode our bikes to his house. Became good friends. His wife Marilyn said, "You guys love football so much. Why don't you write to George Hallis, see if he can be ball boys for the Bears?" So we wrote to George Hallis when we were in 7th grade. He wrote back saying, basically, regret to tell you that job's already taken for the upcoming year, but stay on the Golden Honor Roll and write me back next year. And we did that. And we got a letter back from George Hallis that said, basically, welcome to the Bears.
Wow.
So that's between 8th grade and I think it was May of our 8th grade year. So then, we Saturdays and Sundays, primarily for the home games, we would go down to Wrigley Field and work.
Carl, do you remember it being the same way, the way Tony's bringing it up, how that all broke down?
Yeah, it broke down like that. And by the way, I'm sure inquiring minds will want to know, we got $5 on Saturday and $5 on Sunday.
Wow.
And if we waited for a tip from a player, we'd have a long wait.
Sure. What year was that?
That was 1963 was our first year.
Oh, so 63 is the first year.
That was our first year. So we brought him a championship.
Yeah.
And three Bohemians brought a championship to Chicago. George Hallis and the Ruzicka twins.
But you guys reach out in 62, correct? You guys reach out the year before.
Right. Reached out really in 61.
61?
Well, no, maybe 60. No, 62. Right. And we got the denial and then wrote again and got a letter back in 63. Wow. So in May of 63, we knew we were going to be clubhouse boys.
Wow.
For the upcoming year.
When you get that, okay, keep writing, one day we'll respond to you. Did you think, oh boy, this is not going anywhere? Or did you feel confident that a guy like the Bears or George Hallis this could someday become a reality?
I don't think we really focused on it too much, quite frankly. Okay. We wrote the letter and we just sort of waited to see what would happen. And so it was later, we went to the 25-year reunion of the 63 championship. So that would be 89, I think. And there was a book that they gave everybody, Hallis by Hallis. So George Hallis's biography, basically. And wow. in it, he talks about growing up near Cubs Park that was at that time was on Walcott and
Oak, I think.
well, yeah, Walcott and Polk, right? And he'd wait outside for all the players to come in, and he'd talk to them and get their autographs and stuff.
Sure.
So we did that before we wrote the letters. We would stay at the firehouse on Saturdays before the games, home games, and wait for the players to come out,
Oh,
and
wow.
we would talk to them. So it sort of struck a bell to me when I read the book later that, well,
Sure.
maybe George Halas, had the same experience we did.
Yeah, exactly. But how does
And
it?
he also developed a lot of real estate in Cicero, and he worked at Western Electric, which was the primary employer at the time in Cicero. And that's where he met his wife.
Wow, great.
So he's got a letter from twins in Cicero.
Sure, kind of all tying in.
Right.
Carl, question for you. So you guys know you're going to be working for them in 63. When does the actual start? Like, where was training camp for the Chicago Bears?
Training camp at that time was in Rensselaer, Indiana.
Rensselaer.
We did not go to any of the training camp, and we went a few years later, but we did not go that year. And the letter said to report to Ed Rosie, who was the Bears trainer, and I guess overall boss of the clubhouse, to report to him the Saturday before the first game. So, the Bears played at Wrigley Field,
Right.
and it was being in use still by the Cubs finishing their schedule. So at that time, the first 3 games of the season for the Bears, they played away.
Gotcha.
All right. So the 4th game that the Cubs had cleared out and the Bears were there. So I think maybe we went 1 day or 2 days to help them move the equipment into Wrigley Field. But we just got wind that they're going to work out at Soldier Field on the Saturday before the opener, which was against the Packers in Green Bay.
Wow.
So we said, well, let's go over there.
Right.
And there was no such thing as credentials. Nobody knew who we were at the beginning for sure, right? But we talked our way into Soldier Field, and wait for the players to come out. And the first 2 players that came out together was Roosevelt Taylor and Benny McRae.
Wow.
And they asked us, what are you guys doing here? So we're going to be clubhouse boys for you guys for this year. So we struck up a conversation. They said, well, we'll see you at Wrigley. So it was very exciting.
Oh, I can imagine. And were there exhibition games, before, back in the early 60s? Well, we're talking about 63. Were there exhibition games in 63 like they have the 4 exhibition games now before the season starts?
I don't remember them, quite frankly. If
Yeah.
they were, they weren't ever at Wrigley because, again, the Cubs
schedule.
didn't let them play there until the 4th game of the season.
Well,
But they did have the Armed Forces game every year was at Soldier Field.
Right. Tony and Carl, back in 63, that was a 14-game schedule, correct? Still, that was the old 14 games.
Right.
Yes.
Was it basically constituted by a 7 and 7, 7 on the road, 7 away, 7 at home?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of style. So, I mean,
you played each team twice in your division.
in your wildest dreams, when this 63 season starts and you guys are involved with this, as the youngsters, the teenagers that you were, did you see that this Bear team could be a team like, okay, we could do this? I mean, their record was phenomenal that year. Did you see the talent as the teenager who was making the opinion about the Chicago Bears?
Well, we definitely saw the talent on the defensive side.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they won, quite frankly.
Right.
On the offensive side, I just looked up some statistics. Almost not, you can't really comprehend it. Joe Marconi led the team in rushing, 446 yards.
446.
Second was Ronnie Bull, 404 yards.
Wow.
Third was Willie Gallimore, 321 yards. So Marconi had 2 rushing touchdowns. Ronnie Bull had 1 rushing touchdown. Willie Gallimore had 5 rushing touchdowns. And you look at Billy Wade was 192 for 356 attempts, 53.9%.
This is passing, correct, on the
Yeah,
192, 356?
Threw for 15 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, had a passing rating of 74.0. So it was pretty clear that they won because they had an outstanding defense.
Defense, right. It looks like, and I know Carl had mentioned, and I just saw the fumble recoveries. They created a lot of havoc, that defense, I thought, and just from reading about it.
Yeah. So you asked us, did we have a feeling it was going to be a good year? Well, they won the first 3 games. They, 10-3 against the Packers the first game, and then they won the next 2 games pretty handily.
Sure.
So they're coming to Wrigley Field undefeated. So Tony and I were, really hopeful. All right. So and we were excited. All right. So
Sure.
Tony had mentioned that before we got the job, on the Saturdays we'd go wait for the Bears to enter Wrigley to practice, and then wait for them to exit the practice and talk to them, get their autographs, things like that. So we got really involved in the watching football and learning about it. And 1961, I want to go backwards a little bit, all right?
It's fine.
1961, the 49ers reverted back to the shotgun formation, and they had rotating quarterbacks, and they were demolishing all their competitors. And they had a big write-up about it in the Sports Illustrated. And Tony and I sat at our kitchen table and designed a defense to stop the shotgun. All right. So one of the Bears coaches at that time was Clark Shaughnessy. Was one of the fellows that developed the T formation.
Got it.
And very renowned coach. He was their head defensive coach, and he comes out of the clubhouse. They say it's like around on Waveland, right
Sure.
between the ballpark and the firehouse. Mr. Shaughnessy, what's your plans for the shotgun? So he didn't want to tell us. He says, I got it here, boys, right in my pocket. I said, come, Tony and I says, we're here all the time. We're rooting for the Bears. So,
Right.
Could you show us? All right. So he brought out his scheme, and I think Tony was carrying it at the time. We wrote the defense on a little index card. All right. And it was the exact same defense.
Wow.
Clark Shaughnessy had developed. All right.
So he had to be impressed by seeing
I think he was. He may be shocked. All right.
Yeah.
But and Bill George, depending on who the rotation of the quarterbacks, sometimes Bill George moved up to the line, sometimes he moved back, and
showing
like
them
a
different
defender.
formations, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so our very first day then that we're report to the job at Wrigley Field on a Saturday before the 4th game of the year, the clubhouse was underneath the stands, and the box seats on an angle down to the field. So the further you got into the clubhouse, the wall started closing in on you, the ceiling.
Sure.
We were short, so it didn't seem to bother us at all. All right. But as we're looking out of our equipment area to the main locker room,
Right.
the first locker to our left as we were looking out was Bill George.
Oh, wow.
All right. And we immediately says, hey, Bill, we developed the defense in 1961 to stop the shotgun. All right. And that sort of like broke the ice. And then we waited, all the other players filter in, and we were extremely excited.
Was George in '63? George was at the tail end of his career, correct?
He was at the tail end of his career, correct?
Right. He played. I mean, we'll get to that championship game because I know that's our main focal point of the evening. But he played in that '63 game, didn't he?
Oh yeah, he
Yeah,
was the
he was
starting middle linebacker.
Yeah. How old do you think George was then, Bill George? Late 30s?
Maybe
younger.
mid 30s.
Mid 30s, yeah. But anyway, question I have for you, which I didn't know from either one of you or even reading the book about this game there on the 29th. Did you guys ever did the Chicago Bears ever say, okay, Ruzicka, Tony, Carl, we're going, you guys got to come on a road trip to Pittsburgh with us?
No.
There were no, they didn't have you in the first class in the premiere on United flight.
No.
And I don't know how best to explain it, but we sort of knew relatively quickly not to ask for anything.
Gotcha.
All right. So when the Bears win the Western Division and going to go to the championship game, we didn't dare ask anyone, could they help us to get tickets?
Gotcha.
So at that time, the Bears office was at the 173 West Madison, and we waited outside in the cold in a long line like any other fan until it was our turn and hoped there were tickets left. And we bought tickets for our father and an uncle.
Were you ever offered during that whole season? Were you ever offered, here's a couple of tickets for a family member?
No.
Never. Okay. Yeah. I always wondered about that too, because I mean, I thought there would be some perks, but of course tickets were tickets back in those. That's when a ticket was.
Remember how this is the Hallis family.
Exactly. Yeah. We're not throwing around $100 bills here. Yeah. No, but anyway, I mean, so many things. I mean, that you guys have put into perspective. Of course, they had the great season that leads up to this game. So, if you could take me through that. So, was there a playoff game before the NFC Championship game back in those days, or did it go by record?
No, it was, you had a Western Division and an Eastern Division.
Got it.
So the winner of the Western Division played the first place of the Eastern Division for the NFL Championship.
Got it.
The NFC was no such thing at that time. It was the NFL and the AFL.
Exactly. So, but of course, the NFC, the two top dogs now are going to go at it for what it was. The NFC Championship was the Super Bowl of the time. Right. Exactly.
Right. But it was called the NFL Championship.
The NFL team. Okay. I'm going to start with Tony. I know I could tell by the games how they won and everything else. I think there was a tie in Pittsburgh where I think I see a replay. I was watching it the other day where Ditka was going through people, knocking people down as he carried the ball. But let's get to December 29th, 1963. My first question is, before I answer the question, is how do you compare Wrigley Field for football in comparison to Soldier? The fans are right on top of you in old Wrigley, right?
Yeah, and the field at that time went from the first base line to the left field bleachers, basically.
Right.
Right, and the end zone around by the first base line was 1 yard short of regulation because they didn't have room.
Wow.
So, and you're right. Fans are right on top of you, including in the bleachers. And at that time, the goalposts were on the goal line; they weren't at the back.
Exactly. Carl, when it got crazy in Wrigley with a football game, was it hard to hear? Was it hard to hear for a quarterback, signals and stuff?
I don't think so. And I don't know how to best to say, John, that even for us, working on the sidelines, um, I guess we were aware of the fans, but you're sort of not really aware you're you're concentrating on your job.
On your work,
All right. So, if they made a great play or a bad play, you would hear the applause or the booing. All right. But you had so much focus that the fans were sort of incidental to what was going on.
Right. Exactly. But again,
except for Doug Atkins, because he'd come off the field and he'd sit on the very last seat, then he'd talk to people in the
he
box
would.
seats. Yeah.
And even back then, Tony, that's a rarity for an athlete to be talking, because as you go to a
Absolutely.
professional game now, they don't even look at you when they're coming out
Right.
to the game or when they're leaving a game.
Yeah.
So you remember,
he would talk to him, and then the Bears would go 3-and-out, and he'd tell his fans over there, "Here we go again. I'll be back soon."
Yeah.
he was. You got to remember now. This is along the left field wall at Wrigley, right? That comes down. All right. So when he was at the end, he was at the south end where the wall was already down. So he could put his arm rest on the wall.
Sure.
And then he just talked to the people, the fans. All right. And even with Dick Butkus, Tony and I considered Doug Atkins to be the most dominant player for our 4 years. All right. But he'd be talking to the fans, like Tony says, the Bears would have to punt and he's coming back on the field. He would go like he could barely make it to the huddle. And when the defense was done, he could barely make it from the huddle to the bench.
Sure.
But when he was on the field, he was a sheer force.
He was playing possum, basically showing the other team that, okay,
right.
So we'll go now a little bit more into that December 29th, 63. So somebody told me it was balmy in 90, or was it 10 degrees? Or 10 degrees.
Well, 10 degrees. 10 degrees when the game started.
Wow.
Much colder later.
I noticed in the clips, and of course, Carl has reminded me, Tony, that there was a little bit of snow on the ground. I noticed in the end zone and on the sides. Had it snowed? Had it snowed already a couple of times in December here in Chicago?
Right. Yep.
And how was the ground at Wrigley for that game? Do you remember it being, you guys being on that field? Was that ground hard?
Oh, it's definitely hard.
Yeah.
No question about it.
So they had put hay underneath the tarp.
Okay.
And with blowers trying to make sure that the field wasn't too frozen. Then they took the hay off, obviously. But the Bears didn't work out at Wrigley Field for those 2 weeks very often. Quite honestly, I don't remember. They might have worked out at Niles, Tony, but the game was real. It was real cold. There was snow all around the sidelines. You watch the highlights. You can see when the players are going out of bounds, they're slipping on the snow. Some of them, slipped. A referee slipped, trying to mark the ball from a Bears punt near the south end zone, and it was cold, but we didn't care.
Right. You're
watching
the thrust of this great game.
Unfortunately, Del Schaffner slipped too. He had a pass right there, and he dropped it.
They would have scored. So the game basically starts out in New York's favor, watching, and of course going back to watch it and everything. And I think they scored first on a pass to the legendary Frank Gifford from Y.E. Tittle. What was going through your minds? This is it. There's no tomorrow. You get down right away to an experienced team that had been making the runs all the way, probably since that 58 game with the Baltimore.
Right.
So what goes through your minds when we get down early as every Chicago fan, no matter what generation? Were you guys already like, oh boy, this is going to be a Black Sunday or what?
No, not really, because we knew that the Bears defense was so great that the Giants wouldn't score too many touchdowns or too many
Right.
points. And ultimately the Bears would figure out how to do something. And it was basically their defense, once again, that did it for them.
Right.
Larry Morris intercepted a pass, returned it, 60 something yards, and then when they got the final touchdown, Adol Bradovich intercepted probably on the Giant 14-yard line or something like that. And ultimately, Billy Wade did a quarterback sneak
Sure.
for the last touchdown. That's another
And
thing.
go ahead, Carl.
This is Tony now.
Oh,
Billy Wade had 6 touchdowns for the season, 6 touchdowns rushing.
wow.
Usually just like the 1 yard.
Yeah, like a little
Yeah.
run in and that. Um, they the defense, of course, was the mainstay of that 63 team. Just to jump ahead, and I know we can't compare generations to generations. When I look at some of the figures, and of course, in talking to Carl a lot about this, when I see they had 36 interceptions, 17 fumble recoveries, from Taylor to Pettibone to McRae to Witzel. Is it hard? I mean, I know it's hard to compare, but that 63 defense almost can be compared just as well as that 85 defense. Am I off, or are you guys in agreement?
Oh, absolutely. I think,
So,
Carl, you did some research, right?
yeah, so
Yeah.
in 2007, ESPN ranked the 63 Bears defense as the 9th greatest defense of all time.
Wow.
All right.
What an honor.
It set a record at that time. It allowed only 144 points in the 14-game season. The second place, the Packers, let up 62 points more than the Bears. So it gives you an idea how dominant it was. All right. And it was
Sure.
the third team in NFL history that the defense allowed the fewest rushing yards,
Sure.
the fewest passing yards, and by extension, the fewest total yards.
Wow.
So it was very dominant. And George Allen was the brains behind the 63 defense.
He was
He
the
got,
defensive coach, right? He was the main
yes,
defensive coach.
he got the game ball.
Yeah, I saw that in the book. Tony, I want to go back to something that you said earlier about the records with Ronnie Bull and the other Gallimore. Those, when you say 300, 440 and 404 yards, those were their yards for the season, correct?
For 14 games.
For 14 games. So now, these were grueling offensive and defensive matches, correct? Against all these teams in the league. I mean, this was what I call mano to mano. There was no, the gentleman that was in San Francisco who had Montana as the quarterback,
Right.
where there was rollouts and everything else and all these crazy offensive scheme and flickering it back to the quarterback, back to the running back. This was high impact stuff. So 400 yards for the time,
Right.
tell me if I'm wrong, was a high number, don't you think?
Middle. That's my guess. I'm sure there are a lot of people that were more than that.
Well,
Jim
okay,
Brown,
take a guy like Frank Gifford. Did Frank Gifford have a lot of yards that year?
They had moved the flanker back for that year.
Okay.
So if you look back on all the films, they've the one that, if you Googled 1963 Bears season, there's one where narrated by Jack Brickhouse that takes you through every game plus the championship game. You'll notice that even though the offense couldn't compare with the defense, they had a lot of well-designed plays. The halfbacks, they had a lot of passes to the halfbacks or the fullbacks. Sometimes Billy Wade arcing the ball over the defenders and the backs are running from the side, oftentimes, especially in the one pass in the '63 championship game was right down the middle to Joe Marconi, who was the fullback, that went for 30-something yards.
Wow.
So, they weren't afraid to utilize the middle of the field, which I think is, somewhat of a lost art.
It's a lost art.
And I, will say, while we're on the sort of somewhat on that topic, if you watch the films, they actually played tackle football. They tackled with their arms, with their hands.
Right.
They didn't rarely block somebody down. They never stuck their head down and used the helmet as a battering ram. Right. So it was actually tackle football. It's a much different game.
Yeah, wow. Incredible. I look back again at the game. Our first touchdown was set up, of course, by the interception by Larry Morris, correct?
Right.
Right.
And then the second one to give us the lead was the one by Obradovich
Right.
at that time. But the way the game went, I mean, here, of course, now you guys are down at the time. I'm going to say you guys because I was just a little 3-year-old then. But at the time, the Bears were down 10-7 at halftime. And I read the quote where you guys all said, we're going to get this game. We're going to win this game. Were you guys, I couldn't remember this. I think you did tell me, both of you did tell me. Were you allowed in the locker room at halftime or no?
We were allowed in the locker room at halftime, but there's very little for us to do.
Got it.
So we would choose to stay out and show everybody our talents. Tony would, throw 50-yard passes to me through the goalposts, and we'd entertain the fans.
That was nice. Yeah, that was it. What was the mood of them walking off the field? Can you remember? What's the mood of them walking off the field down 10-7? Because you were around these players.
They were all confident that they were going to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
They were just as confident as we were.
Sure. And again, I mean, when you really go back and look at that game, of course, that's a low-scoring game, but it's the game I think you look at that NFC Championship game, it's a game that you'd want to be watched today to have as a championship game because New York, tell me again, was in it till the end. I mean, they were, and of course, you guys both brought up to me, and I think Carl brings it up to me when you came to see me that one day, Carl, at the start of the second half, it was Hugh McElhaney who could have broke one, and Rosie Taylor made a great defensive play amongst a lot of them that he made in that game.
So he was the last Bear that if McElhaney went by Roosevelt Taylor, he would probably ran it in for a touchdown, and Rosie gave a textbook tackle.
Sure.
And if you watch the movies, he had 2 shoestring tackles against Phil King, the Giants running back, halfback, that also could have went for touchdowns, and those 2 were classic shoestring tackles. All right, so we mentioned that Roosevelt Taylor was our most favorite player,
Right,
by far. All right, but Bill George was the second, probably. All right, but Rosie had led the league in interceptions with 9, and the Bears intercepted. They had 5 interceptions in the championship game. Larry Morris, Ed Obradovich, Dave Witzel, Benny McCray. The next to last play of the game, Richie Pettibone intercepted a Hail Mary pass of Y.A. Tittle. So our very favorite player and who led the league in interceptions did not get one. And it was a little bit of a source of disappointment to Tony and I. All right. But when we look at 3 game-saving tackles, our disappointment is extinguished. We're back to having our most favorite Bear, that we're very proud of him.
Yeah. So your Rosie Taylor at that time for you and Tony was like our Chico Mackey for the Chicago Blackhawks.
Exactly.
Is that correct in saying that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta
So, and I
ask you-
will tell you one time that, he had 9 interceptions, and when he had an interception, he'd sort of like Duke, fake and hesitate, and wouldn't run the ball back immediately. And our Uncle Tom says, when you see Roosevelt Taylor, you tell him that there's an imaginary rope tied around his waist, and when he intercepts the ball, you two guys are pulling him forward.
Wow.
All right. So he mentioned that to him on a Saturday. On that following day, he intercepted one and ran it in for a touchdown. And he comes to the sidelines, and the first thing he comes to Tony and I says, "Tell your uncle that rope worked." So, sort of like Bobby Savoy in the Natural. Pick me
You're
up.
right. That one played by Robert Redford. Oh my God,
Right.
for sure. When they gave him the baseball bat and everything else.
Right.
Tony, when did you know that? Did you guys know, even with a couple minutes left, that you had this game when they took the 14-10 lead? Even though New York was Tittle was replaced in that game because Tittle, Tittle, I'm talking about the quarterback, broke his leg, correct?
Or if he broke it, but he was hurt.
He just twisted his knee or his ankle, but he played the whole second half.
Right.
Glenn Griffin finished the first half.
Yeah,
And
but the second
quarterback,
string quarterback only had a few plays at the end of the first half, and then
Gotcha.
Tittle came back.
so Tittle did play the rest of the second. Yeah, because I see that at the end where they're driving and Tittle was the quarterback. You are correct.
Right.
How your opinion, Tony, of Bill Wade in that game leading the Bears?
He was always real good, in my opinion. Again, the statistics aren't that great, but he did what was told to him by George Hallis and everybody else. And he had a knack of scoring touchdowns, with quarterback sneak.
So he was a consistent performer, correct? All the time. He was very
Oh,
consistent.
yeah.
You could.
A very, very quiet, very religious person.
You know what's a figure that sticks out in my mind here on the notes and in the book? 5 interceptions in that game by the Chicago Bears. That's phenomenal for a game at the height of that game, which again is the Super Bowl of the time. 5 interceptions. I mean, that is just incredible stuff to see that.
If you watch the replays, Wyatt Tittle was under duress most of the game.
They were on him.
Doug Atkins, Ed Obradovich, and the front line along Stan Jones, they're all putting a lot of pressure on Wyatt Tittle. And a lot of his passes, you'd say, geez, was it because he was hurt? And if you watch him, he moves him around pretty well in the pocket. I think it was just that the Bears were getting to him. And he would release it just in time.
Comparing 1963 team to even the current team, 63, they always put pressure on the quarterback. The line of Doug Atkins was phenomenal, putting pressure on. Joe Fortunato, Larry Morris, Bill George, phenomenal, putting pressure on.
Wow, incredible. And I got to tell you, going back to Bill Wade, I mean, he had some great targets besides the backs. Of course, he had Ditka. He had Johnny Morris, who was probably one of the best at the time. The guy never, was always known for not dropping a ball. And I think, Carl, you mentioned to me the other gentleman that was out there, a receiver that I always seem to forget.
John Farrington.
Farrington.
They had two wide receivers that say they didn't alternate plays, but they pretty much shared time with John Farrington and Angelo Coya.
I have to ask you something kind of to take away from this game for just a one quick minute. Another date in our history, and it was a sad day of that year. How was the mood going into that game, knowing that on November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy had been shot? Were they ever thinking of stopping a season? How was the thing in sports? I mean, how did it affect that football world when that happened? Because I think our country went silent for 3 days.
If Pete Rozelle decided that all the games were to be played, but they're not to be televised and not to be broadcast over the radio.
Gotcha.
So we didn't find out until the 10 o'clock news what was the score of the game. That was the game where Mike Ditka got the short pass from Billy Wade against the Steelers, and
That was the game, yeah.
ran it, whatever, ran over 4 or 5 guys, and Roger Clark kicked the tying field goal. So they were away for that game, and they came home the next weekend and played at home against Minnesota. They had 2 ties in a row. So the game against the Steelers, away game, we didn't see them. So we didn't know what their reaction was. This next week, no one talked about it. We're 14-year-old fans hoping that the Bears are gonna get a championship, and
Sure.
we're sad to say, but it's a truthful. We were real angry that the game wasn't broadcast.
Sure. When you're that teenager, you're following a season and everything else,
Right.
and you're an avid fan. Tony, question for you. When that game ends, and of course the Bears come out on top to win that game 14-10, how was it coming off that field? I know Carl had stopped me to show me some clips of you when they scored and how euphoric you guys both were. What was it, a great celebration? By the way, did they have a parade in '63 when the Bears won?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. No.
I mean, it was very exciting.
Sure.
The clubhouse was all, everyone was excited. And I think Carl said that George Allen got the game ball.
Right.
And in our book, we talk about there was a standard song to the player that got the game ball. Hooray for George. Hooray at last. Hooray for George. He's a horse's number.
But our very first game, Stan Jones got the game ball, and that's when we first learned about the song.
Wow.
Right, and we were sort of shy.
Sure.
By the end of the championship game, we were right in there singing along with everybody.
Singing along with, yeah.
So the
and then we go to Yale, and everybody goes, "Oh, they went to Yale because they got a split from the NFL for the Bears winning the championship, so that's how they got their money to go to Yale."
Sure.
And basically, I think Roosevelt Taylor and Bill George gave us $5 each.
Wow. And I get $5 each at that time was good money.
Yeah, well,
not as good as the winning share of $5,899.
Was that per player?
5,898.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. And of course that was.
So you show that's how different that is.
Yeah, well, for sure. But when I say $5, I remember my mom telling me that $10 brought home 4 bags of groceries back in the 60s. So $5, now $10, I think you get a bar.
So at the end of the game, there's a few pictures of Tony being right next to Coach Hallis.
Yes.
Right. And I told you my job was to take care of the players as they came off the field.
Sure.
And the Giants had the ball for the last 2 minutes or so.
Yeah, they
have to score a touchdown because a field goal's not going to win it for them.
Not going to do it.
And my immediate boss, Bill Martell, was equipment manager. He said, gather up all the equipment and take it into the locker room. With 3 minutes to go, and I stonewalled them. And, I didn't go in. I'm gonna watch the end of the game.
Yeah, come on.
I stood on the sidelines and watched.
Was there a party in the locker room?
It wasn't a party, but there was a lot of happy yelling and shouting.
Yeah.
I don't remember any champagne or anything. Do you, Carl?
No.
Okay. Was there any kind of party in the weeks to come just for the Bear organization?
I don't
Yeah,
think so.
yeah.
Did you guys get any kind of bonus where I got to send a 1099 after 49 years?
If I say the $5 or maybe $10 from
Right.
Roosevelt Taylor and Bill George, that was about it.
Any words from Hallis to both of you for doing the job that you did?
No, he, I don't even think he spent a lot of time down in the main players' locker room.
Right.
The coaches had their lockers, and it was
Sure.
the level above the Bears locker room.
Sure. Wow. What a just again a different time and a different era. Listen, we could go on forever here tonight again, but this one really is something that I always wanted to touch on. So I appreciate both of you coming in to kind of break down that game, break down the players, the statistics, and both of you all the time, and especially here tonight, make it seem like, again, it's December 29th, 1963. I mean, reliving this, because like I said at the beginning of the podcast, this was something that we had to cling to for a while as a championship. I think the next championship is not till, if I'm correct, I could be off here, is 1991 when the Chicago Bulls beat the Los Angeles Lakers.
1985 Super Bowl.
Oh, the Super Bowl, yeah. But
the 1985 Super Bowl, 22 years
later,
after the NFL championship.
Sure.
And now it's 2023. So that's what we're on the 38th year.
Yeah, 38th year, right? But
so it gives you a perspective of the futility,
right?
1985.
Well, again,
just go back to the 1985, and I dropped off the DVD from Inside the Bears.
Yes.
Where we would go to the 50-year reunion, and two guys are calling about, "Where's your brother? Where's your brother? He's here somewhere. Where is he? We got to get you guys together." So basically, they got us together, and we were interviewed for Inside the Bears.
Yes.
And we're just sort of free forming like we're doing here, quite frankly. And we tell them about Mike Ditka, right? So, Carl, why don't you tell them about the meeting Mike Ditka outside the hotel?
Well, I had mentioned we had taught that in our other podcast, but
I'll mention it again, though.
So
no problem.
So he's with Dallas Cowboys now, and I'm just by myself on a Saturday evening. The Bears are going to play Dallas at Soldier Field on the next day, Sunday, and he's up there all by himself. And I hadn't seen him since maybe the first year of college or something. Now I have a career in accounting, and he's by himself outside the executive house, and I thought I'd talk to him for a couple minutes, exchange some pleasantries, and he kept me for about an hour. That he was so forlorn and disappointed. He always wanted to be with the Bears. He wanted to get back with the Bears. He was sorry he left the Bears. He considers himself a Bear. And I said, well, why don't you do like Tony and I did when we were in 7th grade and write George Hallis a letter? And didn't think anything about it, John. And then years later, they have a special on ESPN on Mike Ditka, and Mike Ditka's wife says, "Oh yeah, Mike wrote a letter to George Hallis."
And at the same time,
yeah,
George Hallis's number was in the phone book.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was between George Allen and Mike Ditka, right, to be head coach.
Yes.
And we call George Hallis at home, and we say, Mike Ditka, one of the few players that had the courage to stand up to you, never in a disrespectful manner, always wanted to do something more positive. Think he wasn't being used properly. Could he do this? You should be helping. You should be using him this way, et cetera, et cetera. So we said that's the kind of guy that you want, someone that had the courage to stand up to the founder of the NFL.
Yeah.
And in that Inside the Bears, the Bears organization gives us credit for it.
Credit for them, which was fantastic.
So
Well, I gotta tell you,
63 championship, we get credit for, and the 85.
and the 85. And I got to tell you a little bit on Ditka. Of course, being the player that he was, a great player, the courage, the determination. Of course, he did some coaching under the great Tom Landry. So I really felt in 1982, when he became the coach in 82, a couple of years before that Super Bowl, Mr. Ditka was ready, and of course, to take on this role. Gentlemen, again.
So anyway, we're going to tell you that Tony mentioned at the onset that the Bears primarily won because of their defense, right? And there was always like a competition between the defense and the offense.
Sure.
And sort of like the Bears defense treated the offense with disdain, maybe too strong of a word, right?
Sure.
But one person that they highly respected was Mike Ditka.
Wow.
So it's like Mike Ditka and the defense were together.
We're together.
Right?
We're
So
together.
I mentioned to you that we're reliving these memories, and Tony and I had a discussion about, geez, it's a long time ago. People are sort of going to be disinterested, maybe not that popular of a podcast. But then we sort of came to the conclusion that as time goes by, at least we have this podcast.
Yes.
As to put in a memory bank.
A memory bank. And
right?
like I said here a few minutes ago,
there's only 8 living players
left of that 63.
Right. So Johnny Morris, 87 years old. Bob Witoska, 85 years old. Roger Davis, 84 years old. Mike Ditka and Ronnie Bull, 83 years old. Jim Cadile and Ed Obradovich, 82. And Larry Glick, who was a rookie cornerback, he's 81. He was the youngest player in the NFL that year.
8
right? So,
8 of them left. Wow.
Yeah. And in that championship game, if you don't mind, I'll read it. NFL Hall of Famers. All right. Mike Ditka, Doug Atkins, Bill George, Stan Jones, Roosevelt Brown, Frank Gifford, Sam Huff, Hugh McElhenney, Andy Robustelli, and Y.A. Tittle. That's 10 Hall of Famers in that game. The coaches, George Halas, Hall of Fame, Patty Driscoll, Joe Steinahar, Sid Luckman, George Allen, and for the Giants, Ken Cavanaugh was a receivers coach. So there's 17 people that partook in that game that are in the NFL Hall of Fame.
Between the New York Giants and the Chicago Bears combined, that is fantastic. Tony and Carl Ruzicka, I know our time's getting a little limited here, but I have to tell you, this was great tonight because we broke down a great memory here in Chicago, 1963. Again, I want to hold this book up for the third and hopefully not the last time. The Twins, A Journey of a Lifetime. And tonight, I have to tell you both, thank you so much. I felt like it was December 29th because you guys made it of 1963, because you guys made it and reminded me. And then the facts and the figures and this last comment here by Carl bringing up, all those Hall of Famers, and we'll never see players of those likes again. Tony and Carl Ruzicka, I thank you for tonight.
Well, thank you. We really greatly appreciate.
We appreciate everything, John.
No, this is great. I mean, it's so fantastic that we've met, and hopefully again, we're going to do something down the road.
All right. Sounds good.
Good night, everyone. Good night.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.